Share via email. Report story. By skinny_base. Izuku walked up to his front door feeling thoroughly exhausted. Distant sirens echoed in the night, reminding him of his long and arduous day. While he hated to admit it, he was only human, regardless of being a top 10 hero. There was only so much he could do. He fumbled with his keys, eager to get inside and curl up in bed with his favorite person. The thought of her was all that kept him going now. The commission was right, he needed to rest. In the darkness, Izuku struggled with the lock. Finally, he got the right key in the right place, practically falling inside his apartment as he opened the door. He froze for a moment, listening for any sign that he might have woken her up. Silence. It was in that moment of stillness that Izuku noticed how dim the apartment was. Most of the light he could see was coming from a single lamp in the main room down the hallway. But that wasn't the only light source. A bright sliver out from under the bedroom door. He sighed lightly as he delicately swapped his shoes for slippers and snuck towards the door. He hoped she had fallen asleep from exhaustion before she could properly get ready for the night. Reaching the door, Izuku gently pushed it open. His eyes adjusted to the light as the opening grew wider. The furthest bedside lamp softly illuminated their bedroom. The air felt heavy. A familiar figure sat in the middle of the bed, facing away from the door. She was hunched forward slightly, clearly hugging her legs to her chest. Her chocolate hair caught the light of the lamp, seeming to glow on one edge in the low light. Sorrow radiated from her very being as she sat there, unmoving. Deku's heart twisted and fell below his stomach. He took a tentative step forward. Ochako! Wailing sirens echoed around the buildings as Deku streaked through the air. At times like these he was glad his office was on the top floor of the building. Uravity's call for backup had been clear and concise. A large-scale train crash, search and rescue efforts would be needed, unclear whether it was a result of villain activity. All hands on deck. It wasn't long before he arrived on the scene. The huge dust cloud hung ominously over the area, acting as a foreboding beacon. It was worse than he had anticipated. The rail bridge had collapsed underneath a high-speed passenger train that now lay broken and spread across several city blocks. There were carriages strewn across several blocks. Although some were mostly intact, many more were horribly buckled and crushed, while others were completely shattered and unrecognizable. Many of the buildings nearest the railway were badly damaged, some looking like a demolition crew had given up halfway through bringing them down. The streets were filled with rubble and abandoned vehicles. A few bonnets could be seen poking out from under particularly large piles of debris. Quickly, his eyes fell on his companion as she lifted a huge, mostly cylindrical chunk of concrete off one of the crumpled train cars. Deku landed beside the carriage moments after Uravity moved the block clear. Glancing at the crushed carriage, he could tell the doors were probably a lost cause. He leapt up to the space that had just been cleared. Effortlessly, he tore a hole in the crumpled roof and tossed the metal to one side before turning to create another opening. When he briefly stopped to assess the space just beyond the rudimentary entrances, Ochako's voice cut through the panicked air. "You take one, I'll take the other." Deku didn't hesitate. Darting into the carriage, he took stock of the scene before him. The walls held up enough for there to be crouching room inside. Many people were strewn about amongst the buckled seats in various states of injury. Immediately 3 people stood out to Deku as those in the worst condition. He gathered them as best he could, placing 2 on his back and carrying the third in his arms. Promoted stories. You'll also like Much Needed Love Yandere Succubus Momo X Izu, 49.5K 756 after Wattpad. Had decided to delete this story out of nowhere. I and many reader were distraught. So I'm making a remake of the story from the ground up to compensate. Ohm Fluke a day 111K 8.2 kiloamperes. Collection of short Ohm Fluke over 365 days. Please check the second book for the rest of the day's update. Mirko X Shy Male Reader 162K1K I don't own MHA. I hope you enjoy the story I made. Zero Deku Onishots 31.1K 790. Because of circumstances, this book won't be continued unfortunately. Feel free to check out my other stuff. Thank you for understanding. After all, Ohm Fluke 11.3K 802. Will edit once I'm free. N. This is a work of fiction, and any similarity with other works is purely coincidental. Excuse grammatical errors and misspellings. Eng. Finished. 8.2K 508 tilde. He save all of them, just a smile plastered on his face before disappearing through the wind. Her prince from the underworld, half demon is. 0.25.4K 450. It's basically the same story as my succubus Momo X Deku story. I know, real original, but hey, now you guys get a Deku from the other side of the tracks. Everyone, please stay calm, he said resolutely while he worked. We're here to help and we will do everything we can to get you out. I'll be back as fast as I can. With some people in the carriage smiling at his words, Deku stepped back through the new opening. Gravity, I'll try and find somewhere to take the injured. I'll be right back. He took off again, careful to ensure his passengers were safe, heading towards the sirens he could hear getting closer. From the air, Izuku could see many pro-heroes surging towards the disaster. He gritted his teeth and prepared himself mentally. This was going to be a mammoth effort, but he was determined to see it through. This is why he became a hero. He was here to save people. Ochako wasn't sure how long she had been sat there. She held herself, trying to keep some semblance of calm inside her by holding her calm exterior. The twinge of pain from her bandaged wrists didn't help her efforts. Her thoughts were tumbling around her head, images of the disaster plaguing her mind. She had done everything she could, she knew that. Uraraka knew she wasn't the fastest or the strongest or the bravest hero out there. She knew there were better heroes, heroes with better quirks, heroes who handled the crisis so much better than her. But she had her license, she had her quirk. Surely that had to count for something, right? The ground shook. The noise of the busy streets was drowned out by the rumble of crumbling concrete and the screech of tearing metal. The rail bridge was engulfed in a cloud dust. Gravity looked on in horror as a passenger train rocketed out of the cloud, tumbling through the air. Some of the carriages were unrecognizable. The front car smashed through the sound wall and hurtled straight towards her. Ochako removed her own gravity and jumped clear of the incoming thing, slapping it as it passed inches behind her. Her stomach churned as she took on the weight. A moment later she had to release her quirk to avoid evacuating her breakfast. The din of grinding metal a heartbeat later made her regret her decision. The icy fingers of panic scratched away at her skin once again. Everything started off so frantic, so chaotic. The deafening noise, the blinding, choking dust, the uneasy silence that fell over everything for the briefest eternity. Then the worst part, terrified screaming. She shook her head to try and dislodge the memories. It wasn't the first time she had been on the scene of a disaster. Her time at UA had provided a few, both simulated and genuine. That didn't change just how horrifying the experience always was. Everything around you turns to chaos in an instant. Regardless of the specific event, you know that lives are in danger. But that's why she was a hero. She was there to make sure as many people as possible didn't die. She desperately fought against her limits as she lifted the massive chunk of concrete that had buckled the carriage. Lifting it above the twisted metal, she maneuvered the debris to a clear point before finally letting gravity reclaim it. It landed with a dull thud, kicking up yet more dust. Suddenly, the jagged sound of tearing metal pierced the air. Ochako whirled around in horror but breathed a sigh of relief at what she saw. Deku stood there, ripping part of the train roof free from one side of the flattened section. He turned to the other side and tore out another opening. Uraraka ran towards the scene as fast as she could. The green hero quickly glanced between the two openings. You take one, I'll take the other, Uravati yelled, propelling herself towards the carriage. Deku was inside the carriage before she could fully register it. Even with her support gear, Ochako floated through the air for several precious seconds before reaching the hole. As soon as she landed, she looked down to check her footing was stable and nearly collapsed in shock. An arm lay limply on the ground, trapped under the crumpled metal. The skin nearest the metal was stained red with blood. The hand lay open, fingers slightly curled. The muscles were clearly limp. She had failed them. Uraraka forced her unsteady legs to move, willing herself to focus on those she could still save. The faces that stared back at her were full of fear. She did her best to send them a comforting smile, just like she knew Deku was doing in the other half of the carriage. She quickly honed in on those with the worst injuries and pulled out some of the medical supplies she carried. Uravati, she heard Deku call, I'll try and find somewhere to take the injured. I'll be right back. Right, she called back as she heard the telltale sound of her partner charging his quirk and taking off with near unmatchable speed. She didn't have to look at him to know he was carrying someone, more likely some two or three. Instead of dwelling on his efforts, Uraraka focused on patching up the woman in front of her. She tried to take solace in the knowledge that everyone in the carriage who could be saved made it out. She tried to reassure herself that everyone had done everything they could. She tried to tell herself she had done everything she could. It didn't help. The casualties would not budge from the forefront of her mind. The people she was entirely too late to save. The people so grievously injured that they were unlikely to pull through. The indiscriminate suffering that she had witnessed throughout the day was appalling. It shook her to her core. She was supposed to be Uravati. She was supposed to be a hero. As she sat there, curled up on her bed, Uraraka felt like she was the furthest thing from a hero. Upon arrival, Kriti made as many in-ear communicators as she could. She gave some of them to the heroes immediately around her, before giving more to Deku. With a wordless acknowledgement, he raced off to spread them out amongst the heroes at the scene. Ochako watched the interaction from down the debris-littered street. Deku raced over to her group and distributed the communicators. Receiving the device, Ochako wasted no time getting back to clearing the most impeding chunks of debris alongside various heroes with strength quirks or other quirks that aided in lifting. Momo's voice crackled through the device. Comms check. Kriti calling in. Uravati, checking in on comms, she replied quickly. She hoped that the other heroes would follow their lead. Comms check. Deku here. His voice was steady and determined, radiating confidence in just a few words. Gradually the voices of dozens of heroes came through the device. Some names were familiar, while others were brand new to her. After most, Deku would respond with a grateful comment, although some were laced with strain from physical effort. Had the situation been less critical, Uraraka would have found the gesture endearing, and she might have been tempted to comment as such. But right now, they were more than just a fanboy trying to interact with his idolized fellow heroes. They were his attempts to bring light into the darkness. Rays of hopeful sunshine piercing the heavy clouds descending on the hero's collective psyche. Any comment she might offer would be useless noise, muddying up their communication and dimming his light. Soon enough, a few voices took the lead in directing the rescue effort. Deku and Kriti were amongst them. Uraraka wasn't surprised. She could reliably improvise solutions and tactics on the fly, but those two trumped her when it came to larger-scale planning. Dutifully, she fell in line with the collaborated plans. She could lead from the ranks on the small scale. Plastering on her best impression of her usual upbeat self, she moved to the next point she was needed. She couldn't let the desperation show outwardly. She had to be that stable pillar of support for the people who needed her. She needed to be that light, just like Deku. Be the moon to his sun. So many heroes came and did excellent work. So many of them pushed past their limitations. Everyone was on the same page, disregarding their own struggles for status and recognition in order to simply help those in need. And what had she done? Uravati, touting herself as a rescue hero, what had she done? Constantly fighting against the very peaks of her limit, straining her mind, body and quirk, and where had that gotten her? Ordered home early and unable to work to her full capacity tomorrow, if she was even allowed to work at all, and she knew their work wouldn't be done by tomorrow night. If only she could go back and stop herself from pushing too far. But if she did, how many more people would they fail to save? How could she make sure they saved everyone? Where had she gone too far? When did she become a liability? She wasn't sure how long she had been there. It was around mid-morning when it all started. Now, based on the color of the sky, the sun was beginning to set. The nausea that threatened to grow from the pit of her stomach was another reminder of how long she had been working. Exhaustion nagged at the edge of her mind, but she had to push through. There was no time for slacking. She'd had a few quick breaks to gulp down some water and had a very light bite to eat at one point, but she made sure not have too much just in case she pushed herself beyond her limit too many times. It would do no good for a hero with a quirk like hers to pull out in a vomiting fit. She couldn't justify too many breaks. They wouldn't help the people still trapped under the rubble. What also wouldn't help was her getting distracted by her thoughts. Ochako refocused herself on the task at hand, ignoring the confused glance the hero beside her was sending. What was her name again? Ears, reverb, echo. That didn't matter in the short term. What did matter was the kid stuck in a cavity that was once someone's living room, just out of arm's reach. The tunnel they had cleared in the rubble was just too small for them to crawl through safely, but if it were any larger, the whole floor above would come crumbling down. There had to be a way to get them out. Uravati flinched as she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see her bat-eared neighbor holding a coil of rope out to her. Uraraka gave her a confused look. "You can float this, right?" the bat-eared heroine queried. The penny dropped. "Of course," Ochako breathed, tapping her palm on her forehead. She took hold of the rope and unraveled it down the tunnel. It floated gently towards the kid. "Grab on," she called when it was within their reach. After a moment of hesitation, the kid did exactly that. With a nod, the two heroes pulled the rope back. At that moment, Ochako was struck by the sharp pain in her wrists. She clenched her jaw and fought through it. The kid drew closer and closer until, finally, they were clear. The heroes guided them away from the devastated building and gave the child a quick check over. They appeared to be about 10 at the oldest. "Let's get you to safety," Ochako said with the most comforting smile she could muster. Echo gave her a nod before turning back to the ruin. Ochako crouched down to the kid's eyeline and placed a hand on their shoulder. You're about to feel a bit strange, but don't worry, it's just my quirk. They nodded nervously. With a quick squeeze, she activated her quirk. Excitement and fear rushed across the kid's face as they floated off the ground. Gravity quickly plucked them from the air, giving them an encouraging word before pressing a finger to her comms. This is Uravity. I'm en route to the northern triage station with a child. Initial checks show no sign of major injury. Copy that. Child inbound for general and shock, responded the gruff voice of one of the other heroes. She knew he was one of the heroes manning the medical station. Nervously, with a quick squeeze, she activated her quirk. Excitement and fear rushed across the kid's face as they floated off the ground. Gravity quickly plucked them from the air, giving them an encouraging word before pressing a finger to her comms. This is Uravity. I'm en route to the northern triage station with a child. Initial checks show no sign of major injury. Copy that. Child inbound for general and shock, responded the gruff voice of one of the other heroes. She knew he was one of the heroes manning the medical station, but she couldn't for the life of her remember which one. Uravity ran with the child in her arms, carefully winding her way through the devastation. She deftly weaved between piles of rubble, passing several groups of heroes and emergency servicemen working their way through the carriages together. Other heroes and rescue workers made their way to and fro. Amongst them, Ochako's eyes spotted a recognizable, green shape heading towards them. The kid shifted in her grip, clearly spotting him too. Deku ran past, giving the pair a wide smile. You couldn't be in safer hands, kid, he said, slowing his pace slightly as he passed. The kid turned their head and watched as Deku raced off. Ochako had sent Deku an appreciative smile at his comment, but the words barely made it past the surface. Perhaps earlier in the day they would hold some truth, but right now, Ochako could feel the strain in her limbs as she carried the weightless youth. These hands weren't as safe as he thought. They weren't as safe as they needed to be before she knew it. Her feet had carried them to the triage tents. A big, burly hero in a tight, green and yellow costume spotted her approaching and waved her over. Uravity's here, the man called towards one of the tents. So it was his voice she had heard. A paramedic wearing blue high-vis and a mask stepped out of the tent. This way, came the woman's voice. Uraraka followed the medic, still carrying the weightless child. They walked through to one of the cordoned-off sections inside the tent, another paramedic entering with them. Ochako put the kid down on the stretcher bed and released her quirk. She fought to keep the smile on her face, despite her body's protests. Her stomach was uneasy, threatening to evacuate its contents, and her wrists were buzzing with pain. As she turned to leave the room, she let her smile drop, her face naturally falling into an uncomfortable frown. She took hold of her forearm and rolled her wrist. She immediately regretted the decision as the spike of pain made her wince. One of the medics noticed. Come with me, Uravity. Before she could say anything, Ochako found herself being guided to another treatment space. They guided her to the bed, getting her perched on the edge before examining the hero. While they checked her pupils and asked her to remove her wrist guards, Ochako felt a growing sense of inadequacy. With the paramedic's mask obscuring most of their face, the only visual cue she could gauge them by was their eyes. They radiated calm, with a caring light shining through them. Everything about the person in front of her spoke of professionalism. And here she was, the pro hero taking up an EMT's precious time and effort, all because her wrists hurt a bit. A fact that was reinforced as the orderly moved her wrists, causing another sharp spike of pain. They nodded thoughtfully as she winced again. Common signs of quirk fatigue. Exhaustion in both of your wrists appear to be sprained, they said as they began bandaging her wrists. I'm sorry, Uravity, but if you continue like this, you're at risk of causing yourself greater harm, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you the consequences of that in a situation like this. She nodded grimly. What do you prescribe then? Go home, rest, put something cold on your wrists, and keep them elevated. It's clear you've been lifting a lot with and without your quirk today. Depending on the situation and whether your quirk affect your joints, if you get some rest now, you might be able to help out tomorrow. All right. Ochako conceded. Feeling utterly dejected, she got to her feet and slowly made her way towards the tent's opening. Disappointment and frustration swirled deep inside her. She should have done more, had to do more. She couldn't do more. How many people had she failed today? How many people still needed saving? How many heroes had to pick up the slack? With her thoughts spiraling, she absent-mindedly reached up to her communicator. She knew she should inform the other heroes that they were now down by one. She had no idea what to say. Before she could say anything, the device crackled into life, carrying a familiar voice. This is Deku, heading to Northern Triage with one victim, major head injury. Ochako froze mid-step. Had the universe not rubbed it in her face enough today? Taking a deep breath to keep calm and ease her stomach, she stepped outside to await his arrival. Dread and remorse mingled with the nausea at the pit of her stomach. She wished she could still be there by his side, saving people. Spotting the incoming, iconic, green costume, she readied herself to deliver the crushing news. Ochako. Every muscle in her body clenched as she heard that unmistakable voice. The gentleness and concern in his tone were so tangible, so overwhelming, it hurt. She started shaking. He was back already. He had come back to find her like this. Her mind started to race, fearing what he would think of her. She was always positive. She was always capable of pushing through the hardships, they had done so together so many times. Izuku spoke up again, but Ochako didn't hear him. Her world started to dim, all outward sensations were slipping away. She began to keel over, falling on her side. She frantically grasped at anything she could reach. Everything began shifting. Moments later her mind registered the bedding floating towards the ceiling. She couldn't control her quirk. She hadn't done that in years. Her legs were flailing. The room was spinning. She was spinning. Ochako fought against the panic. It was too much. Suddenly, Izuku was in front of her, holding her tightly in his strong embrace. Everything around them slipped further away from her mind. Her entire being broke. All her pent-up emotions crashed over her in overpowering waves. Nothing could stop them now. Crushing sorrow flowed into unbridled rage, then fear and loathing and remorse. Desperately, she buried her head in his shoulder, screaming and crying out as her mind was battered by the emotional torrent. She clung onto Izuku's clothes, now wet from all manner of her facial fluids, with such desperation that her knuckles turned white. I'm so sorry, she wailed. I'm a failure. I couldn't do enough. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Her voice was muffled against his shoulder, but he could make out every word. He held her firmly, keeping her head in place, while fighting back his own pain at seeing her so distraught. His disfigured hand rubbed slow, tender circles on her back as she wept. He gently repeated the most comforting mantra he could think of. It's okay, I'm here. I love you. Ochako tried to focus on his words, his strength, his love. She gripped onto him even harder, nearly ripping the clothes off his back. Izuku interspersed his mantra with kisses on her cheek and temple. Gradually, She became more aware of her surroundings again. Her breathing was still shaky, and her mind was still a bit foggy, but she was slowly getting her bearings back. It was so trivial. It was almost overwhelming. They were floating at an odd but mostly upright angle above their bed, surrounded by their pillows and duvet. The light of the lamp was sharp to look at, poking over the top of the lampshade, forcing her to squint. As she tried to steady herself, Ochako's stomach moaned loudly. Before either of them could react, vomit spewed from her mouth directly onto Deku's shirt. For a moment, the room was silent. Izuku nervously kept his gaze on his partner. The putrid, sweet, acidic smell assaulted the air between them. Uraraka stared at the stain. Slowly, laughter began to spill from her mouth, gradually growing hysterical, before morphing into more shaking sobs. Deku didn't let go instead, he focused on steadying them both. He consciously took deep, steady breaths beside her ear, and continued to rub her back. As he did so, Izuku did what he could to position himself beneath her with his unoccupied shoulder closest to the bed. After what felt like hours, Uraraka's sobs slowly reduced until they were only gentle sniffles. Her head felt light and fuzzy. Her stomach felt uneasy, ready to evacuate itself at the drop of a hat. Her throat was sore from her terrified, furious screaming and her limbs were heavy. She couldn't remember a time she had ever felt this rough that didn't involve medical attention. But in spite of all of that, everything around her suddenly felt clearer than ever. "I'm sorry, Izuku," she said weakly. "Hey, you have nothing to apologize for," he said with so much love and certainty, Ochako almost believed him. "That's not true," she replied gently, her voice carrying a noticeable wobble. "I went a bit overboard there. I made everything float. I pretty much ruined your shirt. I threw up over the bed. And that's not even mentioning my complete failure to be a he." Her rambling was cut off with a squeak when a pair of lips pressed against hers. She melted into him, losing herself to the warmth of his kiss. The foul taste of sick didn't matter. The stickiness of her snot-covered lips or his sweaty arms around her back didn't matter. In that moment, all that mattered was them. He was there for her. When they pulled apart, their eyes locked. Her damp eyes shone with a combination of hope, fear, joy and tears. Worry mixed with admiration in his emerald orbs, surrounded by that ever-present desire to save. "When did you pick up my mumbling?" Izuku joked. His voice was soft yet filled with passion. "What I saw today wasn't a woman failing to be a hero. Today I saw a fantastic rescue hero doing everything she could to save as many lives as possible. What I saw just now wasn't a display of weakness. I saw someone so kind and compassionate, who does her best to do good, fight against the weight of the world." He blinked back his tears. "You do so much for so many people, but you bottle up the things you don't want others to see. Tonight, that bottle broke. And I'm glad I was here to see it. Sometimes you need to let things out, and I would hate for you to have to go through that alone. I wish I didn't have to go through that at all, even if you're here. This sucks." Deku chuckled. "I used to get panic
Şöyle
attacks when I
geçiyor.
was younger. Those weren't much fun to go through. I don't know if that was a panic attack or something more. You just take it steady, okay? How are you feeling now?" "Frayed," she murmured. Stillness enveloped the room as they floated there, holding each other. Exhaustion slowly started to flow over them. With the emotional outburst she had just been through, Ochako was just glad to have some respite from it all. Her eyelids suddenly felt heavy. She had to fight to keep them half open. Suddenly, her stomach grumbled again. Her eyes shot open. She hurriedly put her fingers together behind his back and the pair dropped onto the bed. Her stomach churned at the release of her quirk, and face turned pale as they bounced. One of the pillows crashed down onto the lamp, knocking it to the carpet and making the room feel like it was moving as the light shifted, further disorientating her. Midoriya hastily adjusted his hold on her and carried her to the bathroom. Her head was over the toilet bowl moments before another stream of vomit spewed from her mouth. They knelt there for several minutes. He held her hair clear of her face and rubbed her back while she emptied whatever was left in her stomach into the toilet bowl. Eventually she stopped retching. As she slowly backed away from the toilet bowl, catching her breath, Izuku kept his hand on her back but let go of her hair. With his newly freed hand, he reached over and flushed the mess down, before tugging his t-shirt off over his head and dropping it into the bathtub. When his hand left her back, Ochako looked over at him, properly taking him in for the first time that night. He looked exhausted. Concrete dust tinted his messy, green hair to a paler tone. The faint light spilling through the doorway shone off the sweat that covered his muscular form, highlighting the dozens of scars scattered across those muscles that he had accumulated throughout the years. Some were large, some small. Some were from villains, others from his own destructively powerful ability, but all told stories of his selfless attempts to help others. And here he was, doing his best to help her now. Ochako gave him a wavy, yet grateful smile. In that moment, the light in her tired eyes conveyed more than words could. The amount of love, trust, and appreciation they held for each other, she couldn't do it justice, but she didn't have to. For the first time since the morning, everything felt calm. Are you ready to head back to bed? Izuku asked softly. Actually, I want to see if the news is on, Ochako replied hesitantly. His eyes widened in surprise. Are you sure? She nodded gently. He stood up and offered her his hand. Taking hold of his wrist, she rose to her feet, wincing slightly as the action tugged on her wrist. With her head still swirling from the mixture of emotions, crying and retching, she instinctively put her other hand on his shoulder to steady herself. His hand found her upper arm, ready to hold her up in case she keeled over again. Once she was clearly stable, they made their way through to the main room. She walked over to the sofa and dug around for the remote, while he made his way to the kitchenette. Finding the controller, she sat down and turned on the TV, making sure the volume wouldn't wake any sleeping neighbors. She could hear the clatter of glass and the hiss of the tap coming from the kitchenette, shortly followed by the even padding of feet on the wooden floor. Here, Izuku handed her a glass of water. I'll be back in a minute. Ochako hummed in acknowledgement as he turned towards the hallway. Her eyes flicked to his torso as he turned away. It wasn't just Izuku's kind heart that she admired. Taking a sip of water, she brought her attention back to the TV. Finally, she found a news channel. Two newscasters sat at a large desk in a studio, dressed in formal attire. One of the presenters' mouths was moving silently. A photo of the collapsed bridge was superimposed on the wall behind them. The sound caught up with the screen mid-sentence. Further afield have been directed towards the rescue effort. Those who arrived on the scene soon after the bridge collapsed have now been sent away to rest. The Space Hero 13 and Lemillion are amongst those confirmed to be currently involved. The image changed to an aerial shot of the scene of the crash from earlier in the day. From the high angle, the jagged husk of the train cut a clear line through the battered city streets, switching this way and that way in harsh angles. Far too often, the line curved along a crumpled carriage, or stopped and started where a one had broken against a building or simply from the forces involved in the crash. It has been reported that Uravati was present when the incident occurred. Eyewitnesses have said her quick reaction saved the front carriages from severe damage, likely saving many lives in the process. As the newscasters spoke, the camera zoomed in on one small part of the rescue effort. In the middle of the shot stood Deku, bracing a buckled car on its side, while another hero hurried around him and heaved broken chunks of building clear of the vehicle. He looked unmovable. The newscasters' words faded from the forefront of Ochako's mind as she admired her boyfriend's display of strength. At first, the other hero didn't stop long enough to remain in frame, making it hard for her to recognize them. Their dark gray costume with hints of some other dull color was so hard to identify. The only thing that made them out as a hero was the way the clothes hugged their body. No sensible firefighter or paramedic would wear something so form-fitting. Then they stopped for a moment in the center of the frame. A dusty visor sat between long, pale helmet that covered their ears and framed their head. Brown hair, grayed by concrete dust, flowed down to their shoulders. The skin-tight body suit, wrist guards, belt, and long boots suddenly looked very familiar. It was her. Ochako gasped. She knew exactly which little rescue that was. A family of 4 had been stuck in their car for half an hour, half buried in rubble. One of the kids had a broken arm. Their mother in the driver's seat had broken both of her legs, and both parents were sporting concussions. The parents had clearly been fighting to stop their children and each other from panicking. Once she had cleared the debris, the two of them pushed the car over onto its wheels. Deku tore the doors off the passenger's side and leapt over the car to do the same again. Moments later, Uravity's torso disappeared from view into the car. She remembered reaching inside the car like that. Her first priority was calming the frantic family. The camera pulled back as Deku waved over a group of firefighters carrying the jaws of life. Pride and satisfaction washed over her at the sight of herself and her partner in action. She didn't look slow, weak, or afraid. She looked like a true hero. They had rescued that family together. Deku and Uravity. The TV cut back to the news studio. Footage there of Deku and Uravity on the scene earlier today. I believe we also have footage of Deku's reaction to the hero rotation this evening. The shot changed again, this time to a view of one of the buildings lit by a temporary floodlight. It looked like the angle was originally for a reporter to stand in front of while giving live updates. The framing clued Ochako in that the camera was slightly off its original angle, watching the green-clad hero she knew so well, flanked by a couple of other heroes, talking to someone in a high-vis jacket. The images shifted in and out of focus. We don't know how many people there are still trapped. We can't give up on them now, the on-screen Deku insisted. His voice initially seemed calm and measured, but Ochako could pick out the underlying frantic edge in there. Her heart tightened. She knew the conversation that was about to happen would hurt him more than anything else he had been through all day. We're not giving up on them. We just need you to step back and allow the next wave of heroes to take your place. You'll exhaust yourself if you keep pressing on like this, the person in high-vis replied. As the cameraman finally found focus, it became clear that the figure in his was a man from the commission. Kriti was one of the other heroes in frame, looking just as dusty as the other two. I'm happy to let more heroes join, but I'm not ready to step away from this yet. We're still clearing the building that took the worst hit, and we'll need to do one final sweep over the whole area for anyone we've missed. I can still be useful here, even if I let the others take charge. I can assist with coordination. Deku was trying to keep his tone jovial, but it was noticeably forced to her ears. Ochako could tell Yaoyorozu had noticed too. We don't want you getting too tired. What if this goes on for another day? Will you still be here to help? The other man's reply was terser. I can't just give up on them. The hero's yelled declaration seemed to catch both the commission officer and the hero Uraraka didn't recognize off guard. You don't have to give up them. All we are asking you to do is to go home and rest. If this isn't cleared by the morning, which unfortunately seems quite likely, you and the rest of your agency will be directed straight back here. These people will be saved, but you're in no condition to do the saving right now. Kriti stepped forwards and placed her hand Deku's shoulder. His gaze shifted to her hand. Deku, Uravati has already gone home. The paramedics instructed her to rest. She's on the bench for the moment. I know, Yaoyorozu, he replied solemnly. With a deep breath, he looked back at the man from the commission. His emerald eyes shone with determination, but his posture was more relaxed. Okay, I'll be here tomorrow. It was at that moment that Deku walked back into the living room, now only wearing a pair of baggy shorts. He walked over to the sofa and gently sat down next to her. Ochako held her hand out for him to hold, only to gasp as a cold sensation landed on her wrists. Her eyes shot to the spot to see Deku's hand there. Worry immediately filled her chest. Why was his hand so cold? As if he read her mind, Izuku placed a cold, plastic packet in her open hand. Cold packs, for your sprains. Ochako was surprised for a moment. He took hold of the back of her wrist and held her arm up. She rested her other wrist on the cold pack. The relief she felt as the cold calmed her throbbing wrist was heavenly. I've changed the bedding too, so when you're ready we don't have that to worry about. You're an angel, she said, leaning into his side. You're more angelic than me. You can fly, plus you have the aura, he stated humbly. The aura. Your smile is one of the brightest things in the universe, brighter than all the stars combined, he said sweetly, unable to keep the color from his cheeks. Ochako's smile faded slightly, despite how earnest his words were. I just try to reflect your light, she said solemnly. You were inspirational today, not just to the people in need. You say that as if you weren't, which I can assure you is not true. Since we first met, you've been inspirational to me in so many ways. You were the first hero I saw on the scene today, lifting a huge block of concrete off a train car. That was so cool. I couldn't do much on my own. Nobody could, not even All Might in his heyday could save everyone single-handedly in a disaster as widespread as that. But knowing that I was with heroes like you kept me going. Knowing you had been sidelined for your own safety pushed me to work harder so we didn't struggle in your absence. Izuku's entire being shone with admiration as he spoke. Not that you shouldn't have come home. You need to look after yourself as well as other people. A 3-year career wouldn't do you justice after all you've done to get to where you are. Like you can talk about looking after yourself, Ochako laughed. I'm getting better, he protested. Says the man who was ready to work through the night, she countered, nudging him with her elbow. Izuku laughed. You got me there. It was a big incident. Okay, I'm not exactly comfortable knowing there are still people who need rescuing, even with more pros on the scene, he admitted, his voice growing softer as he spoke. Ochako rested her head against his shoulder. If it weren't for her sprained wrists, she would wrap him up in a hug. We've got to let them deal with it for now, Izuku. Besides, I'd rather have you here than out in duty tonight. He leant his head on the top of hers. Sharing a bed with you does sound nice. He grabbed a sofa pillow and put it under her arms, before adjusting his position so his other hand held the cold pack. With his now freed right hand, he took hold of her free hand. She gave it an appreciative squeeze. A pleasant stillness grew around them, underscored by the newscasters discussing various details of the relief effort for the umpteenth time. With her head comfortable on his shoulder, Ochako let her mind wander. Slowly, it circled around Izuku's words. His encouragement and reassurance after such an awful day. His determination and drive to help. His love and admiration for her. A memory of a conversation years ago sparked in her mind's eye. I thought Shiozaki said being visited by an angel was terrifying in the Bible, she pondered aloud. Oh, that's you when you fight, he answered not a beat later. Ochako couldn't help but smile. Where stories live. Discover now.